Beneath the dark blue surface of the ocean, a small private jet was slowly sinking toward the seabed. Its fuselage was torn open. The cabin door hung crookedly, and pieces of metal drifted around like broken feathers. Inside, a woman sat slumped in her seat, completely unconscious. Her white business suit floated gently in the water, and the seatbelt trapped tightly across her chest kept her from slipping away as seawater continued to fill the cabin. A few meters away, a man was swimming toward the wreckage with all the strength he had left. That man was Marcus Hill, a black auto mechanic who had simply been driving home after a long shift. He was no firefighter, no trained diver, and he carried no equipment. But when he saw the jet crash into the water right in front of him, instinct took over. Marcus jumped in without hesitation. The shock of the cold ocean hit him instantly, but he kept going. His arms cut through the water with urgency, each push fueled by the fear that whoever was inside might only have seconds left. As he approached the torn open door of the aircraft, Marcus finally saw her clearly, the woman trapped inside, pale and motionless, her hair floating around her like strands of white silk. A final pocket of air escaped from the cabin, rising to the surface. Marcus knew what that meant. Time was running out. He reached inside, fighting the pressure of the rising water, and grabbed for the seatbelt that held her in place. The belt was jammed tight, difficult to pull in the shifting water. But Marcus didn't stop. He kept tugging until the latch finally snapped loose, freeing her. Seconds later, he pulled her out of the wreck and pushed upward, forcing his tired legs to kick harder, bringing both of them back toward the surface. His lungs burned, and his vision blurred, but he refused to let go of the limp body in his arms. When they finally broke through the surface, Marcus gasped for air, pulling her head above the water. She didn't respond. Her skin was cold. Her eyes were closed. Still, Marcus whispered under his breath, as if trying to hold on to hope. "Come on, stay with me. I've got you." He had no idea who she was, no idea what her life meant, and no idea how this moment would reshape his own future. Marcus only knew one thing. He was determined to save her. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the woman he had just rescued from a sinking jet was one of the most powerful billionaire CEOs in the country. Just minutes before Marcus pulled her out of the sinking aircraft, Elena Hart had been sitting calmly in the front row of the jet, reviewing documents for an upcoming private meeting. As the CEO of Hart Tech, she was used to flying alone, moving from one city to the next without a pause. The cabin was quiet, with only the hum of the engines breaking the silence. But that calm didn't last long. Elena felt the first jolt when the jet suddenly shook hard enough to rattle her cup of water. She looked up, confused, and then another violent vibration hit, stronger this time. The lights flickered. A thin line of smoke seeped in from the vent above her. Before she could ask anything, the pilot's strained voice came through the intercom. "Engine failure on the right side. We're losing control. Everyone, fasten your seatbelts and brace." The jet lurched to the right, forcing Elena against the armrest. She tightened her seatbelt as the aircraft dropped sharply. Papers flew off her tray and scattered across the floor. Somewhere behind her, a passenger screamed as luggage tumbled down from the overhead compartment. A loud bang shook the entire cabin. Elena turned toward the window and saw flames bursting from beneath the wing. Her pulse spiked. She gripped the seat, trying to steady her breathing while the plane continued to plunge downward. The pilot tried one last time to level the jet, but the controls barely responded. Alarms blared. The cabin lights flickered again and then shut off completely, leaving only the emergency strips glowing faintly along the aisles. Elena leaned forward, head down, arms wrapped around her knees, just as she had been trained in dozens of safety briefings. But no amount of training could take away the fear spreading through her chest. The final moments were a blur. A violent drop. A deafening crash. Cold water slamming into the cabin. The impact threw Elena against her seatbelt, knocking the breath out of her. Darkness rushed over her vision, and the only thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the icy sensation of seawater rising around her legs. Minutes later, she was trapped inside a sinking jet, until Marcus appeared in the water, risking his life to save hers. When the jet finally hit the water, It didn't feel like a landing. It felt like an explosion. The nose struck first, sending a violent shockwave through the entire cabin. Alina's body jerked forward, but the seatbelt held her in place, digging painfully into her shoulders. The sound of metal tearing apart echoed around her, followed by a rush of freezing seawater forcing its way into the cabin through every crack. For a split second, Elena regained consciousness, but only enough to feel the sting of cold water rising quickly around her legs. Her head throbbed from where it had slammed against the window, and her vision blurred in and out like a flickering light. She tried to lift her hands to undo the seatbelt, but her fingers wouldn't respond. Her body was too weak, too disoriented. The aircraft tilted forward as the ocean pulled it down, and the cabin darkened even more. Emergency lights flickered weakly above her before shutting off completely. The only light left came from the moon shining dimly through the broken cabin door, sending a pale glow across the sinking jet. Water surged up to Alina's waist, icy and heavy. Panic flashed across her fading consciousness, but her body refused to move. She tried to call out for help, but no sound came from her lips. Her eyes closed again, and her head fell to the side as the cold water crept higher. Outside the jet, bubbles streamed upward as the damaged aircraft sank deeper. Debris floated around it, seat cushions, papers, broken pieces of the fuselage. The ocean swallowed everything without hesitation. As the water reached her chest, Alina's breathing slowed almost to nothing. The seatbelt held her in place like a trap, and the weight of the water pressed down on her chest. Her world faded into silence. Meanwhile, above the surface, Marcus Hill had just jumped into the ocean after witnessing the crash. He fought through the rough waves, diving again and again to locate the jet beneath the surface. Each dive pulled him farther into the cold, but he refused to give up. By the time Marcus reached the sinking aircraft, the jet was already several meters underwater. He spotted the open cabin door and swam toward it, kicking hard against the pull of the current. When he looked inside, he saw Elena, still strapped into her seat, unconscious, the water now almost covering her completely. That moment became the turning point. If Marcus had arrived even 30 seconds later, she would have disappeared beneath the ocean for good. And with no hesitation, he forced himself inside the cabin, ready to fight for her life. Marcus didn't waste a single second. As soon as he reached the open cabin door, he took one deep breath and pulled himself inside. The cold water tightened around his chest, but he forced his body forward, pushing against the pressure. The interior of the jet was dim and eerie, filled with floating debris and swirling pockets of trapped air. He spotted Elena immediately. Her body was limp, her head tilted to the side, and the water had already climbed past her shoulders. The seatbelt still held her tightly in place. If Marcus had arrived moments later, he knew she would have slipped beneath the surface forever. He reached her seat and grabbed hold of the belt, pulling hard. Nothing moved. The buckle was jammed, likely damaged during the crash. The rising water pressed Marcus against the ceiling as he struggled to stay steady. He planted one knee against the seat frame and yanked again, but the latch refused to release. Marcus's lungs started to burn. He hadn't taken enough air before diving, and he could feel the lack of oxygen catching up to him. But leaving wasn't an option. He looked at Alina's pale face, the way her hair floated lifelessly in the cold water, and he knew he couldn't swim back to the surface without her. He reached down and tried to pry the buckle open with his fingers, pushing deeper, trying to feel the mechanism. The cold made his hands numb, and the metal scraped his skin, but still he kept working. A few seconds later, a small stream of bubbles escaped his mouth, his body begging him to breathe. Marcus ignored it. He hooked his fingers under the belt and pulled with everything he had left. Finally, with a sharp metallic click, the latch snapped open. Elena's body floated free, drifting upwards slightly as the water carried her weight. Marcus wrapped one arm around her chest and used the other to push debris aside. He dragged her out of the seat, turning both their bodies toward the cabin door. The pressure inside the jet made movement slow and heavy, but he kicked hard, fighting against the pull of the sinking aircraft. By the time he reached the exit, his vision was beginning to narrow. The urge to breathe became overwhelming, and his body trembled from the effort. But the moment he cleared the door with Elena in his arms, He kicked upward with all the strength he had left. The faint light from the surface guided him. He followed it desperately, refusing to let her slip away. Every kick brought them closer to the air he so desperately needed, closer to the moment that would decide whether either of them survived. Breaking through the surface felt like being reborn. Marcus gasped the moment his head emerged from the water, sucking in air so sharply that his lungs burned. For a second, he couldn't see anything, just darkness, cold waves, and the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Elena floated limply against his arm, completely unresponsive. "Stay with me, come on," Marcus whispered between breaths, his voice shaking from exhaustion. He tightened his grip around her upper body, making sure her head stayed above the water while he treaded fiercely beneath them. The ocean was rougher than he expected, each wave pushing them sideways, threatening to pull them back under. The wreckage of the jet had already disappeared beneath the surface. Only scattered pieces of debris floated nearby, bits of foam, papers, and twisted shards of metal drifting aimlessly in the dark. Marcus looked around, searching for anything that could help them stay afloat, but there was nothing strong enough to hold two people. The temperature of the water began to sink into his bones. His muscles trembled, not just from the cold but from the sheer effort of holding Elena up. She was light, but in the water, an unconscious body felt twice as heavy. He tilted her face toward him, trying to see any sign of life. Her lips were pale. Her breathing was almost non-existent. Marcus raised one shaky hand and tapped gently on her cheek. "Come on, breathe, you have to breathe." Still nothing. He knew he needed to get her out of the water quickly. But the shore was farther than he remembered. The dim lights from the coastline flickered in the distance, nearly swallowed by the night. Marcus took a deep breath and started swimming toward them, pulling Elena with him in slow, steady strokes. Each movement sent a jolt of pain through his arms, but he refused to stop. He kept his eyes on the shoreline, using it as a lifeline. The waves slapped against his back, saltwater splashed into his mouth, his legs felt heavier with every kick. But he kept going. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus heard something, a faint sound behind him. A motor. He turned slightly and saw a small rescue boat approaching, its spotlight sweeping across the dark water. Someone must have seen the explosion and called emergency services. Marcus lifted his free arm weakly, signaling. "Here, over here," he shouted, his voice barely louder than the waves. The boat turned toward him. He leaned his forehead against Elena's, relief washing over him like warmth in the freezing water. "You're going to make it," he whispered. "I didn't pull you out of that jet for nothing." And for the first time since the crash, Marcus felt a spark of hope, small, fragile, but real. The rescue boat approached quickly, its engine cutting through the waves as the spotlight locked onto Marcus and the unconscious woman in his arms. The light was so bright it made him squint, but relief washed over him instantly. The weight on his chest loosened a little. Help had finally arrived. Two emergency responders leaned over the side of the boat, shouting toward him. "Hold on, we've got you. Just stay where you are." Marcus didn't have the strength to reply. He simply tightened his grip around Elena and kept her head above the water until the boat drifted close enough for one of the responders to reach them. A strong arm extended down toward him. "Give her to me first." Marcus nodded, though his body trembled from the cold and exhaustion. He carefully lifted Elena's upper body toward the rescuer. Another responder grabbed her legs, and together they pulled her onto the deck. She lay motionless on her back, water streaming off her suit as they immediately checked her pulse and breathing. "Barely responsive. Start warming her now," one of them ordered. Only after Elena was safely on board did Marcus feel arms reaching down for him. His muscles resisted as he tried to climb, his limbs shaking uncontrollably. With one final pull, the rescuers hauled him up onto the deck beside her. Marcus collapsed onto the floor, coughing up seawater and gasping for air. Every part of his body ached, but the first thing he did was turn his head toward Elena. The responders were already working fast. One placed an oxygen mask over her face. Another wrapped her in a thermal blanket. A third gently pressed on her chest, trying to stimulate a response. "Is she breathing?" Marcus asked, his voice rough and barely audible. "Shallow, but yes." One responder answered while adjusting the mask. "We need to get both of you to shore immediately." Marcus let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He watched Alina's chest rise slightly under the oxygen mask. And for the first time since he'd seen the jet crash, he felt real relief. As the rescue boat turned toward the coast, the lights along the shoreline grew brighter. The responders secured Marcus with a blanket as well. But he hardly noticed. His eyes stayed fixed on the woman he had pulled from the ocean. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her status. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing. He had done everything he could to keep her alive. And soon, on that shoreline ahead, he would learn just who he had rescued. The rescue boat reached the shoreline faster than Marcus expected. As soon as the hull scraped against the sand, a team of paramedics rushed forward with stretchers and equipment. Floodlights illuminated the entire area, turning the beach into a makeshift emergency zone. The responders on the boat shouted instructions as they carefully lifted Elena onto a stretcher. Her skin looked pale under the bright lights, her hair still dripping seawater. One medic placed 2 fingers on her neck to check her pulse again. "Pulse is weak but steady. Let's move." Marcus watched as they secured her with straps and covered her with another thermal blanket. For a moment, he tried to sit up fully. But his body protested. A paramedic kneeled beside him immediately. "Sir, don't move too quickly. Your body temperature is low. We need to get you checked out as well." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I'm fine, just make sure she's okay." The medic glanced at him with a mixture of concern and respect. "We are, but you need treatment too, come on." With help, Marcus was transferred onto another stretcher. His body trembled violently now that the adrenaline was wearing off. He could hear radios crackling around him, orders being shouted, and the wheels of the stretchers crunching over the sand. Alina's stretcher was pushed ahead of his, heading straight toward the waiting ambulance. The paramedics surrounding her moved quickly, attaching sensors and preparing warm IV fluids. Then something unusual happened. 2 men in black suits ran toward the scene. Out of breath, they looked completely out of place among the rescue team. One of them rushed up to the paramedic next to Elena. "Is she alive? Please tell me she's alive." The medic looked at him. "Who are you?" "We're her security detail. She's Elena Hart, CEO of Hart Tech." Marcus heard every word, and for a moment, his mind froze. Elena Hart? The billionaire CEO? The woman whose face had been on magazine covers for years? He stared at her stretcher as the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. Suddenly, everything felt surreal. He had jumped into the water to save a stranger, only to discover that stranger was one of the most powerful women in the country. Before Marcus could process the information, a paramedic tapped his shoulder. "You're going in the next ambulance. Stay with us." As they pushed his stretcher forward, Marcus kept his eyes fixed on Alina's ambulance doors closing. He had saved her life. But he had no idea how much this moment would change his own. The moment Alina's ambulance reached the hospital entrance, the doors flew open and a full medical team rushed out to meet her. Nurses, trauma doctors, and technicians moved with practiced precision, guiding her stretcher down the brightly lit hallways. The fluorescent lights reflected off the wet floor beneath her, leaving a trail of seawater behind. Severe hypothermia, possible head trauma from impact, one paramedic reported as they pushed her toward the trauma bay. Her oxygen saturation is low, start warming measures and check for internal injuries. A doctor commanded. Marcus arrived a few minutes later in a separate ambulance. He was alert but exhausted, wrapped tightly in a heated blanket. Hospital staff helped him off the stretcher and onto a chair in the hallway. His body ached everywhere, but his thoughts were fixed only on Elena. He turned to a nurse beside him. "The woman I pulled out, is she going to make it?" The nurse placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's in critical condition, but she's responding to treatment. You did the right thing getting her out when you did." Marcus nodded, though worry still gnawed at him. He waited quietly as the medical team worked behind the closed trauma room doors. Every minute felt like an hour. Down the hall, Elena's security team paced back and forth, talking rapidly into their phones. Words like crash investigation, press lockdown, and board notification echoed in the corridor. They barely even looked at Marcus, unaware that the man sitting in the hallway, shivering and soaked, was the reason Elena had survived at all. Inside the trauma bay, doctors monitored Elena's vitals as machines beeped steadily. Warm IV fluids flowed into her veins, and blankets covered her from head to toe. A technician checked her pupils while another applied pressure bandages to a wound near her temple. "Her pulse is stabilizing," one nurse announced. "That's good. Keep monitoring her respiratory rate," a doctor responded. Back in the hallway, Marcus leaned his head against the wall, eyes heavy from exhaustion. He replayed the rescue in his mind, the sinking jet, the cold water, the moment he finally freed her. He couldn't fully grasp everything that had happened in the last hour. An older doctor stepped out of the trauma bay and approached him. "You're Marcus Hill, correct?" "Yes," Marcus replied quietly. The doctor gave him a long, grateful look. "She's alive because of you. If you hadn't acted when you did, she wouldn't be here." Marcus exhaled softly, relief mixing with disbelief. He had saved a billionaire CEO without even knowing her name. And the real story between them was only just beginning. Hours passed before a nurse finally approached Marcus in the hallway. "She's stable now," the nurse said softly. "If you feel strong enough, you can see her for a moment. Just one visitor at a time." Marcus stood slowly, his body still weak, but he nodded. He followed the nurse down a quiet corridor until they reached a private recovery room. The lights were dim, the room warm, the machines beside her humming steadily. Elena lay in the center of the bed, wrapped in clean blankets, an oxygen tube resting beneath her nose. Her skin had regained a bit of color, and the tension in her face seemed softer now. Marcus hesitated at the doorway. He had seen her drowning, frozen, almost lifeless, but this was different. This was the first time he truly saw her as a person, not just someone he was fighting to save. The nurse gave him a gentle nod and stepped out, leaving him alone in the room. Marcus approached the bedside slowly. He didn't want to wake her, but he felt compelled to say something, anything, to the woman whose life had become intertwined with his in the most unexpected way. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You made it." For a moment, the only response was the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. But then, her fingers twitched. Marcus froze, leaning closer. Elena's eyes opened slightly, unfocused at first. She blinked a few times, her vision settling, trying to understand where she was. Her gaze drifted around the room, then eventually landed on Marcus. Her voice came out weak, almost a breath. "Are you the one who pulled me out?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Yeah, I guess I am." Elena stared at him, a mix of confusion and gratitude in her eyes. "I thought I was gone," she murmured. Everything went dark. "You weren't gone," Marcus said quietly. "Not on my watch." For a brief moment, emotion flickered across her face, relief, disbelief, and something deeper, something that went beyond gratitude. A tear slipped down her temple. Just then, the door burst open. Her security detail rushed in, followed by a doctor. "Ms. Hart, thank God you're awake," one of them said, immediately moving to her side. Elena looked at them, then back at Marcus, as if trying to hold on to the one moment she remembered clearly. The doctor checked her vitals. "You need rest," he said gently. The security officer finally noticed Marcus, and his expression shifted. "You're the man from the rescue?" Marcus nodded awkwardly. "Just did what anyone would do." But the officer shook his head. "No, not anyone." Elena's voice came out faint but firm. "He saved my life." Marcus stepped back slightly, unsure what to do next. He wasn't part of her world, not the security teams, not the billion-dollar empire, not the high-power executives buzzing around her. He was just a mechanic who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or maybe, exactly the place fate needed him to be. Marcus stepped back toward the wall as the medical team continued checking Elena's condition. He didn't want to get in the way. After all, he was just a stranger, someone who had happened to be there when things went wrong. He expected to be thanked, maybe shaken hands with, and then forgotten once the chaos died down. But Elena didn't look away from him. Even as the doctor spoke to her, even as her security detail hovered anxiously, her eyes kept drifting back to Marcus. There was something in her expression, recognition, gratitude, and a quiet need to understand the man who had dragged her from the ocean. When the room finally settled, she lifted her hand weakly toward him. "Can you stay a moment?" she asked. The doctor nodded at Marcus. "A few minutes. She needs rest, but this seems important to her." Marcus approached slowly, stopping beside her bed. Elena's voice was soft but steadier now. "I heard them say your name," she whispered. "Marcus Hill." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She let out a small breath. "I don't remember much after the crash, but I remember cold water. And then a hand pulling me up. That was you." Marcus lowered his gaze for a moment. "I did what anyone would have done." Elena shook her head slightly. "No, most people would have called for help and stayed on shore. You jumped into the ocean. You risked your own life." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, just full of meaning neither of them could quite put into words. Finally, Elena spoke again. "When I woke up and saw you standing there, I felt safe, in a way I can't explain." Marcus didn't know what to say. Compliments were rare in his life. But something about hearing them from her, someone with power, influence, and a world so different from his, hit him deeper than he expected. A knock sounded at the door. Her security chief entered quietly. "Ms. Hart, the board wants an update. They've been notified of the accident." Elena turned her head slightly. "Tell them I'll speak with them later." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Later." Once the door closed, she looked back at Marcus. "When I'm recovered, I want to see you again," she said. "Properly, not in a hospital room. I want to thank you the right way." Marcus blinked, unsure how to respond. "You don't owe me anything." Her expression deepened, gentle, sincere. "I owe you my life." The room fell quiet, and in that silence, something shifted, something neither of them fully understood yet. But both of them felt it. For Marcus, it was the moment he realized this wasn't just an accident he happened to witness. It was the event that would change the direction of his entire life.